Genesis 30:25, our pickup spot. And I'll be reading a few verses here as we finish up this chapter before we move on. Verse 25 says, "And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go into my own place, to my own country." He had a desire. He wants to go home. He's been away a long time now, but he wants to return to the promised land. The Lord's talked to him about this. The Abrahamic covenant has gone down and passed to him, and that land, and it becomes precious to him. And the Lord is beginning to work in his heart, and he wants to go. So he's asking Laban to allow him to leave, basically peacefully. He says, "Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee." Notice he doesn't ask for anything except what he has worked for, nothing more. He wants his family and those things that he has labored for 20 years to receive. And Laban said unto him, "I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry. For I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake." Well, the one thing we see is that Jacob has been a good witness here. Laban is not a believer, but he sees that the Lord has blessed him. So what we've seen over these years, he's been a faithful witness. He hasn't weakened. And he said, "Appoint me thy wages, and I will give it." We've heard this before, haven't we? "You tell me, and I'll just give you what you want." And he said unto him, "Thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and is now increased unto a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now, when shall I provide for my own house also?" You notice what Jacob does here? He doesn't take any credit for himself. He gives the credit to the Lord. The Lord hath blessed thee. In blessing Jacob, he blessed Laban. He doesn't take that credit like we do so often. Me, I. He didn't do that. And he said, "What shall I give thee?" And Jacob said, "Thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this for me, I will again feed and keep thy sheep. I will pass through thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats. And of such shall be my hire. So shall my righteous answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me." And Laban said, "Behold, I would it might be according to thy word." And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he set a 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Okay. Jacob says, "I want to go home. I want to go back to my father's land, the promised land there." But Laban is bargaining with him again. Now, Laban is not the kind of fellow I want to bargain with. And over these years, I'm sure that Jacob is really leery of him now. Laban has never changed. He's still a conniver. Jacob has changed over the years from what he was to where he is now. But Laban is still, he will pick your pocket while he's whispering in your ear. What we see here is basically Oriental diplomacy. Two Bedouin leaders, and they're cautiously on guard as they negotiated one with another. And Jacob had learned to be very careful and very alert when he's dealing with old Uncle Laban. You would think that a family would have more compassion, wouldn't you? But old Laban, he's always up to tricks. He had stated that he had learned that God had prospered him through Jacob. Now, we're going to find out that he is a idol worshiper. He may have used his idols to tell him this, I don't know. He may have looked at omens, or he may simply have perceived the fact that God is in control, at least in what he probably considers Jacob's God. Dark-colored sheep were considered a good omen, but perhaps an inordinate number of them spoke of this. Maybe there was a lot of them out there. But Jacob agreed that God had blessed Laban. Yes, that's true. In anything I did, God blessed me, and you were blessed by God. So, you see, Jacob proposed a plan which seems, at face value, really not going to gain him much. It doesn't look like a really good deal for him. He would receive wages for his work. The black and multicolored goats, the rarer kind, the speckled and spotted sheep, which would be born. The ones you don't see many of. Boy, I tell you, it didn't take Laban long. Did you notice? It didn't take him long. Well, he quickly agrees. This is a good deal. You see, he thought he had it made. He thought he had Jacob over a barrel. Jacob's going to be doing all this work, and I'm going to reap all the rewards. He's not going to have anything. He's trying to see that he takes all the advantages himself. He hadn't changed, has he? Nevertheless, he's looking out for his own interest, and he's hoping to prosper from this. So, it's Laban's ploy added a little bit more to the risk. For greater security, did you see what he did? He immediately removed all the animals of abnormal color, giving them to his sons, not to Jacob. And his sons took them 3 days' travel away. No chance that Jacob was going to be able to mate those animals with the animals he was taking care of. Oh boy, Laban is conniving, he's scheming, he thinks he has him. Oh, I've got him over a barrel now. He's going to be here taking care of my flocks forever. Well, 3 days' journey. He's really being careful to get everything he can. He was seeking to ensure that Jacob was going to have a very difficult time in increasing his herds and flocks. Laban was probably laughing as he left that day at that deal. Kind of that little, remember old Snidely Whiplash in cartoons? That's him. Verse 37. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar and of hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters and the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, but that they should conceive when they came to drink. And the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought forth cattle ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flocks of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not into Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whosoever the stronger cattle did conceive, Jacob laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feeble were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and men servants, and cattle and asses. God's hand here is working. Even though Laban had plotted and schemed, and he figured he had it all made, God had promised to bless Jacob. And God keeps his promises. And God blessed Jacob in a very unusual way, didn't he? There's a word play here in Scripture. You may not see it if you don't do a little word study. It's a word play on the name Laban. Do you notice that Jacob peeled back the bark on the sticks and exposed the white? The Laban. He saw his flocks grow. It's kind of amazing. He played the Laban game and won. He outwitted Old Whitey. That would be the nickname for Laban, Old Whitey. The white streaks. And sometimes if you go back and you study a little bit in the original language, you see a lot of wordplay. And here it is. Old Whitey's been outsmarted here. Clearly, as Jacob later admitted, God intervened to fulfill the expectations that Jacob had in the branches. Let me say that again. God is in control. Laban may have thought that this had some mystical power. I don't know. Maybe he had a dream. I don't know. But it's God doing this. Not the branches, not anything else. God is seeing to this working. The peeled branches placed in the watering trough appeared to make the animals reproductive as they mated in front of the troughs, but it's God. In addition, we see though that Jacob is smart. He has learned a lot about animal husbandry over the years. He knew about the mating and what brought forth, and even though he may not know about genes and those types of things, he knew a lot about it. And he used selective breeding by mating stronger animals for himself and the weaker female goats and sheep for Laban. That's what he's doing. He's smart. But this was not the only time God's part of Jacob's success was much greater than it seemed to the observer. So Jacob was greatly prospered in fulfillment of God's promise at Bethel at the expense here of Laban, who now received in part recompense that's due him. He's been really shortchanging Jacob now for a lot of years. You reap what you sow, and now he's reaping it. He's played his part well, but now he's going to lose. And there's a fascinating struggle now that's going to develop between Laban and Jacob. Laban's injustice and pretense preceded Jacob's project, just as Isaac's attempt to bless Esau earlier prompted Jacob's deception. In both cases, the attempt to defraud Jacob was actually overcome by him, by God's intervening hand. However, afterward, Jacob viewed his real gain as divine blessing, though he would not accept the efforts of fear and craftiness. It's God. He understands God is doing this. He is growing and maturing right before our eyes. So we've got the plot beginning to thicken a little bit now. We're getting ready to see now that there's going to be a flight from Laban. He's going to run. He wants to go home, and he's going to go. And God has blessed him, and God is going to lead him, and he's going to follow. Beginning at verse 1 of chapter 31. And he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's hath he gotten all this glory. You want me to tell you what's going on there? Jealousy, anger. That's our inheritance going on over there. It doesn't matter that he has worked honestly for this. No such thing. He has taken it away. He stole it. That's their attitude. Here again, the fruit doesn't fall far from the tree. These sons are exactly like their dad. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. Laban now is jealous. How in the world can he be profiting like this and growing like this, and I'm not getting my fair share? And the Lord said unto Jacob, Return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field unto his flock, and said unto them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father hath been with me. And ye know that with all my power I have served your father. Your father has deceived me, and changed my wages 10 times, but God suffered him not to hurt me. If he says thus, the speckle shall be thy wages, then all the cattle are speckled. And if he said thus, the ring straight shall be thy hire, then bear all the cattle ring straight. Thus God hath taken away the cattle of your father, and given them to me. And it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up my eyes, and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring straight, speckled, and grizzled. And the angel of the Lord spoke unto me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up thine eyes, and see, all the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring straight, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban doeth unto thee. I am the God of Bethel, where thou anointest the pillar, and where thou vowest a vow unto me. Now arise, get thee out from this land, and return unto the land of thy kindred. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not counted of him strangers? For he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God hath taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God has said unto thee, do. Quite a story there. Once again, the time is right. Notice God's time, it's perfect. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream, spoke to him. So we see Jacob is going to leave for Canaan for two reasons. He's going back to the promised land. One, animosity by Laban and his sons. It's growing against poor Jacob. And Laban's mood itself had turned dangerous. You notice when he said, he has cheated me 10 times, but he hasn't hurt me. Jacob senses that Laban is going to do something to him. And it must be getting close because, of course, the Lord is going to have him to move. All the family, the sons and the father, were jealous. They were jealous of Jacob's success. You know, that still happens today. People are jealous of somebody else's success. When some churches is growing by people being saved and saved and saved, some pastors get jealous. Instead of saying, hallelujah, don't be jealous. Jealous leads to problems. You know, to that family, Jacob had stolen all that property. Forget the agreements. Since they had come out on the losing end this time, they said Jacob is stealing our property. Now, over those years, how much property did Laban steal from Jacob? Don't mention that. So God, the sons were thinking of their own inheritance. If Jacob keeps going like this, there'll be nothing left for us. How many times do people think about that? Well, what's the first thing that happens in some families when mom or dad dies? How much did they leave me? Or they get in the old age, don't spend too much now. You don't need anything. You're okay. What they're thinking about is not their family. They're thinking about their billfold. That's what these fellows are thinking. But God stirred up the nest here. God is stirring. He's behind the scenes working here. He is stirring up that jealousy. Because why? It's time for Jacob to go home. It's time to get back in the promised land. I brought you here for a purpose, Jacob. You needed to grow. You needed to mature. You needed to trust me. You needed to have children. Time to go home. So he stirred up the pot, and Jacob needed a little prodding to get him going. Remember, he's ready to go, and he makes another deal with Laban, and he stays. This time, the Lord says, go. And you see, secondly, that God directed Jacob to return to his own land. And the Lord said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. There are the words of comfort. I will be with thee. Don't worry about Laban. Don't worry about anything. Don't even worry about Esau. I'm with you. Okay? I'm with you. Here was a divine call to leave for the land of promise. It's time. God said, it's time. My perfect time. It's time. Let's go. We also see that Laban was very deceptive. What did Jacob say? 10 times he changed the rules of the game. 10 times he changed my salary. 10 times he cheated me, basically. Jacob must have been as patient and understanding and forgiving as any man ever walked the earth. He must have had the patience of Job. I don't think I would have had that much patience. Not only had Laban changed the rules 10 times, but Laban continually attempted to rob Jacob of what he had so diligently worked for. It all began when he was working for Rachel, and he wakes up the next morning and he's married Leah, and it's continued all these years. See, Laban was to me more than a deceiver. He was just a plain, outright, ordinary, everyday thief. That may not be nice to say, but I don't see any other way to say it. Jacob worked hard. He kept up with the end of every bargain he made, and Laban just stole everything that he could back from him. One thing that Laban didn't consider or know about was that God was in control, and he's blessing Jacob. And no matter what Laban did, he is not going to thwart God's plans. He might have thought he was a powerful fellow, but not against God. Nothing Laban planned or did was going to stop the purpose of God. That's another lesson men need to learn today. Men think they can change God. They can control him. They can make things happen. Not going to happen. You know, Jacob gave a marvelous speech to his 2 wives, didn't he? Who met him at his request in the fields. He sent for them. Notice he didn't quit work. Did you notice that? He's still doing his job. He calls his wives to come and meet him. But this is more than just mere self-defense here. Jacob wanted to take with him a willing family. He wanted them to be dedicated to him. He didn't want to drag them away from their home. He did not want them to be unhappy about leaving. So he attested to them. He told them about God's leading and his provision. He tells them the whole story. He now must keep the vow that he made at Bethel. Back in Genesis chapter 28 and following, it says, "And Jacob vowed a vow, saying, if God be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, Bethel. And all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the 10th unto thee." You see, his mind now is back at Bethel. He remembers the vow, and God reminds him of it. You vowed a vow. And God has kept his end of the bargain. He's had food to eat, raiment to wear. God has blessed him continually. Now, as he explains all this, the response of both women is in faith. It's amazing. And Rachel and Leah answered and said unto him, "Is there any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? We are counted of him strangers, for he hath sold us, and hath quite devoured also our money. For all the riches which God has taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God hath said unto thee, do." They're going willingly. See, they too have seen Laban. They have watched him. They have seen the deception. They've seen the cruelty. They've seen the thievery. Matter of fact, he's stolen from them. You see that? Where's our inheritance? Where's the money? He sold us, basically, and we have nothing. He took it all. They understand completely that their father has wronged not only Jacob, but also them. And it also shows something else. It shows that both of these women loved Jacob. They want to go with him. Laban had exploited his daughter's wealth and had lost their goodwill. Money and power and possessions became more important than family. That's a terrible thing. When family is pushed to the background, you don't have a family anymore, do you? With everything which had happened over the years, we see the daughters were willing to leave their father. They didn't drag their feet a bit, did they? They were willing to follow their husband back to the promised land of the Abrahamic covenant, although it was a strange land to them. They were going to an unknown place. Didn't bother them. And Laban's true colors were seen of everyone. Even his daughters have seen it. Verse 17. Then Jacob rose up and set his sons and his wives on camels. And he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting, which he had gotten in Padan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. You notice how the Holy Spirit inspired Moses here to write, he carried away all his cattle, his goods, the cattle of his getting. He's not stealing anything. The point is made that he is taking only what is his, what he has worked for. It's his legitimate salary. And Jacob followed the Lord's command, and he did it quickly. That's one of the things that always amazes me in Scripture. These men of faith, when the Lord calls, they do it quickly. And Abraham's, remember when he was called to sacrifice Isaac, he got up early in the morning and went. It happens so often. Elijah, I want you to go up to Ahab and Jezebel. He quickly went up. That's what he's doing now. God said, go. Jacob's going. He rose up. He placed his sons and wives on camels. It's going to be a long trip back home to get over back to Isaac's home. He took not only his family, but all of the goods, everything that he had worked for, everything that was his, everything that God had prospered him there with. Nothing, he didn't steal a thing. He took with him everything that was honestly his. He took nothing which he did not rightfully belong to him. At least he didn't take anything that rightfully did not belong to him. But we find out in verse 19, and Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian. And in that he told him not that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Jacob's leaving is not the end of the story. There's going to be a whole lot more to this story than him packing up and taking off back to the promised land. As soon as Laban found out about Jacob's departure, the pursuit starts. Unbeknownst to Jacob, there is a major, major problem here. And it's more risky than anything he would ever have thought. His favorite wife, Rachel, stole Laban's images. It's plural. Literally, she stole some of the household gods. Figurines of deities. We'll break it down. And this clearly demonstrates that Laban was an idol worshiper. I suppose all who lived in his house and in that region were idol worshipers. We are seeing now the effect of sin in the world. Here it is, idol worship. We've been talking about it endlessly, it seems like. There's a pagan influence in Laban's family. And doesn't that explain Laban's characteristic? Doesn't it explain how he would steal from his own nephew and his daughters? How he would continually break his word? That's right. Demonic relationship here. The wordplay shows that Rachel to be a true Jacob. For there are parallel thefts. She stole away. He stole away. He didn't tell Laban he was going. He stole away. And Rachel stole the gods. A parallel stealing here, if you will. For two different reasons. Perhaps she told herself she deserved them since Laban turned the tables on her in the name of custom and married off Leah first, depriving her being the senior wife or the first wife. Whatever the reason, her hard-headed self-interest almost brought disaster. Or could Rachel be holding on to a religion she grew up with? The Bible isn't specific on this. Is she holding on? Is she trying to hurt her father by taking this? Trying to punish him in some way? The last thing a believer wants is to have an idol with them. So to have this idol, the household god, may have meant the right to inheritance. It is, according to some of the old tablets dating back to the 15th century BC, it did mean that the possessor of that was the possessor of the inheritance. It certainly meant Laban was without what he thought was his protection. He counted on these gods. He counted on that idol. He depended on them. Just the way people do today. They're God. And he's trying to worship it. And so this gives Laban really another pretext to chase Jacob. He stole my gods. I'm going to go eat them. It's one thing for Jacob to take the flocks and the family, but to take his gods? Oh no, he's not going to stand for that. Perhaps Jacob might try to steal back to Haran someday and claim Laban's estate. All these things are probably going through his. If you're dealing with a thief, he's going to think like a thief. Didn't it? That's what he's going to think about. So failing to find his gods, Laban later in verses 43 to 53 is going to make a treaty that it's interesting when we get there because you see his true character again when he makes that treaty with Jacob. Verse 22 says, "And it was told Laban on the third day that Jacob was fled." Jacob had a 3-day head start. Remember, how far did Laban move those flocks and herds from Jacob? 3 days. Now he's got a 3-day head start. A lot of times numbers are interesting in Scripture. You remember when Moses brought the commandments down from Mount Sinai? How many people were slain that day at the giving of the law? 3,000. On the day of Pentecost, how many were saved? God's a great bookkeeper. It's always wonderful to see these things. But a 3-day head start is not huge here because Jacob had a family with him and it's going to slow them down. Some of those young men, those children are not going to be able to move as quickly. They're going to have to ride on camels. The move is going to be slower. They have the flocks and the herds that have to rest and have to water and have to eat. So then they had to be careful. So Jacob could not move as swiftly as Laban and his sons. But he had something Laban didn't have. God's word that he was going to be with him to guide him, direct him, and protect him. Now, we're going to have to wait until next week to get the rest of the story because the next list of my notes are extremely long and we won't get out of here until 8 o'clock. So we will stop now and pick up there in verse 23 next week.